Hi, team. Welcome back to another episode of Identity Human. So, obviously, today I've got Charlie Stuart. And if you notice, I'm not showing you my face, and the sound quality might not as good in this intro bit. And that is because I'm currently editing on the go in Hong Kong. But I really enjoyed today's episode. It's not often I get to enjoy conversations with what we call like high level title, high level leadership individuals. But I feel like these are the conversations that we should all hear because they give some really tangible, useful ways of communicating. And Charlie is a diplomat, sorry, and he is very well experienced in navigating tricky situations. He also has a son that plays for England and very proud of it. So we get to delve into what's behind the title, who's behind the title, and just hear a little bit more about Charlie's journey. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did.
So welcome back to the Identity Human podcast with your host, Don. Again, I'm flying solo. There's no Ray today, but we do have another special guest. And I'm very honored today to have Charlie Stuart join us. Charlie, welcome.
Thanks, Don. Great pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I've been very excited to have you on because in all honesty, we'll get into the title that you've got on LinkedIn and get you to explain that a little bit. But I really like the fact that you've got, and for the listeners, like Charlie's got a lot of experience from a leadership point of view. And I jumped on just as a casual call with you about like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And it was so interesting to hear some of the metaphors you brought in that I haven't actually heard a lot of in the corporate side of stuff that I go into. And I almost feel like that's the stuff that we need to draw on and remind people more on the essence of leadership as opposed to the business economics around it. So I'm hoping that we'll get some of that out
With
today.
pleasure.
Yeah, but first and foremost, Charlie, on your LinkedIn, it obviously is diplomat dot. So obviously you're saying like diplomat, that's what it's all about. But then, Chief Peace and Security Advisor on Africa, European Union's External Action Service. I mean, that's huge. That's quite a title. Can you explain a little bit more?
It's a hideous acronym to begin with, but no. Well, firstly, as I say, thanks very much for having me on, Don. It's a real, it's a privilege for me to be here. The job is an interesting one. It's a new one. It's very much a strategic role, which is looking at the emerging and evolving threat as it sort of materializes across Africa, and advising or reflecting on how, at the strategic and geopolitical level, that is then impacting on the European Union's interests. And to the extent that we can understand what the problem is, then the question then is, from a policy and engagement point of view, how do we react and respond to that? I'm very much a glasses half full person. So every it's a cliche, but every crisis is an opportunity. So how do we understand this evolution of the threats as they're emerging, and importantly, how can we turn it round to our advantage with the resources that we have available, that are increasingly getting spread thinner and thinner, as you can imagine, because of events around the world. It means that we've got to make our priorities. Now, the European Union is very much a values-based organization, as indeed, these are upholding universal values as opposed to Western values. These are values that everyone signed up to. But we're finding ourselves living increasingly in a very transactional, seems to be the favorite word of the day, but interests-based world. And it's that finding a fine balance between how do you ride the two horses of interests and values, which don't necessarily always ride in the same direction. How do you protect your interests, but without compromising or sacrificing on your values?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, there's a whole 5 hours worth of conversation to be delved into any of those aspects there. But I suppose from our point of view, in terms of the audience that we'll have, how, like, we don't often get access to those people that seem to be in positions that you're in, talking about the elements. And I think the wider elements, or maybe if we take the high level views, how would you recreate some confidence back in to what you're doing from the outside? Because obviously from a leadership level point of view, is there just seems to be so much turmoil. And, Donald Trump comes in and he does what he does, and half the people hate him. So there's no trust in government. If you hear European Union, everyone will have a go at that. And I feel it's really good to hear an inside voice. Is how would you reinforce confidence in those hierarchy or that structure of people that are at that level that don't get a chance to converse with just your everyday people, the touch points? What
Well, I think it's an important question, because I think, again, it's a reflection of the world that we live in today, is that everybody wants quick fixes and quick solutions, and they want it now. And I think the role that I play is very much the sort of macro, over the horizon thinking about. So this is happening. Where is this going to take us? How can we be more proactive? And proactivity is the key element here, which is how can we anticipate what's coming up ahead and then be ready for it. The challenge, of course, is that with events happening as they are, you get into a spiral where events are, in many cases, are happening faster than our ability to react and respond to them. Or make decisions about how to respond to them. In many cases, are the instruments and tools and programs and budgets that we have available are already set, and they're not particularly flexible. And trying to get these tools to operate in a different way is a challenge, because once the decision is taken, you're locked into it. But of course, there's the downside to that, which is the moment you become reactive and reacting to events, then your ability to influence and control the outcome is diminished. So this is about very much trying to sort of look at the macro trend. So for instance, in the case of Africa, what does climate change mean as a threat? What does population growth mean as a threat? What does water insecurity, food insecurity? Where is that? These are the kind of the macro things. But then, of course, there's the other, what I'd call the hard edge of security around violence and extremism and radicalization and all that sort of stuff, which is very much, in many ways, as a consequence of the sort of downward slide from the politics into the economics, into the social space, which then, you can imagine it's like a vortex just swirling ever faster. And I think there's from a European point of view, and as we engage with our African partners, and the key word here is partnership, because in many ways we want to have the same thing, which is prosperity. But what does that actually mean? I mean, it's an easy word to use, and we want peace and we want all that sort of stuff. But you're not going to have prosperity if your focus is on getting trade and investment coming in. You're not going to get that without stability. So again, it's a journey of, well, okay, in this particular context, if we want to have prosperity, what does that mean? And what is it that's preventing us achieving that? And let's have a conversation, together across the table, respectfully, and engaging with one another to understand one another's perspectives. And that's the key thing here is about perspective, appreciating and respecting the alternate perspective. And having a conversation where together as partners, you can come up with a plan together on what it is you need to do and how you're going to get there. So it's, why are we doing this? What is it that needs to be done to achieve the why, and how are we going to do it? And then that reflection of across the spectrum of what needs to be done, looking at what is being done already, what is being done by others, and where are the synergies that we can leverage off? How can we start actually making it a genuine coalition of activity? Because, and then, lastly, is also identifying where the gaps are in all of that. Because if you can identify the gaps, then you can start filling those gaps, if not with your own instruments, then perhaps by encouraging others to come on board. But in all of that, you have to have a narrative clear about what you're trying to do. There's a very famous old Chinese expression that talks about strategy without tactics is the slow path to success, but tactics without strategy is the last sound you hear before defeat. And so all too often we focus on the kind of the operational and the tactical level, but without a sense of, why are we doing this? Why does this really matter? And if you can at least agree on the why, then the what and the how is easier to define.
Yeah, do you know what's amazing to hear that? Because obviously the angle that Identity Human podcast, everything's trying to do is, I always talk about perspective from an individual point of view, and we bring it right down to who Charlie is, and any battles that you go through, it's always about finding perspective. Then you take it into a marriage, it's all about exactly what I was like just thinking there. If you take it into a marriage, it's why are we married, where are we going, what are the gaps, what are we not getting, what's the missing information. And even up at that level, and why I'm really trying to highlight this to our listeners is it's those principles don't change, because it's still about getting two people that have different perspectives to a table to try and create a common ground to go and go and achieve what is commonly defined as success up that level. So I think the next question is, what have been the challenges that you faced going into that kind of environment? What, like, from an individual perspective?
Well, first and foremost, you can imagine that being British and working for the European Union is a bit of a challenge. But as I've said on other podcasts, the kind of the standard joke is that there's only 12 of us left that don't have a second passport. So we're calling ourselves the Dirty Dozen. As we either die or retire or retire, disappear, or whatever it is, we'll go down to the Hateful Eight, the Magnificent Seven, the Famous Five, and so on until we're the last one standing.
Fantastic Four.
But so in that respect, it's been a bit of a challenge, certainly since 2019 and the withdrawal of the UK from the European Union. But in many ways, that's quite liberating. From my experience, because it's meant that how does one say it? I found it's liberating because it means I can sit in a room and I'm not worrying about saying the right thing or worrying about offending someone or thinking about my promotion or whatever it is. It's like, because what are you going to do? You're going to fire me? It's like I mean, that's I'm being flippant, but it means that therefore you can sit there and you can ask difficult questions and you can push superiors on matters that are of concern, which is why are we doing this? Why does it matter? And if you can't tell me why it matters, then we're just doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff. And I think this is one of the other areas that from my experience, it's what do you measure success by? And all too often we measure success by perhaps how much money we've spent, or how much equipment we've delivered, or how many people we've trained, or whatever it is. But so what? What's the effect of all of that? What's the impact of all of that? What's the outcome of all of that? And if you can't articulate the outcome, then what you're doing is you're just doing things for the sake of doing things. And that what it means is you build your narrative around a bunch of free electrons that are generating a lot of heat but not a lot of light. And my job is very much about, again, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's connecting dots. How do I bring those electrons together so that actually they do magnify effect in a more constructive way? And the challenge, I think, probably to answer your question more succinctly, is the real challenge is often getting people to see the perspective. We're looking at often the same thing, but from different perspectives. And it is that thing of, how can I come to your side of the table and see it through your perspective? And I'd like you then to come to my side of the table and see it through my perspective. And then respectfully, we can have a conversation about the common thread, what it is we're trying to achieve here. Yes, there will be different ways of doing things. Yes, there will be different experiences, different cultural backgrounds, different exchanges. But all too often, is if you can just focus on why it is we're doing this, the rest of the conversation becomes, in my experience, much easier.
And it takes someone good to be reminding everyone as the journey goes on to remember the why.
Well, I mean, I again, another image I often describe to people is, I say it feels sometimes like it's a room filled of, depending on whether you like classical music or modern music, but it feels like a room filled with musicians that are calling themselves a band or an orchestra, frankly, some of them are really good at what they're doing. Some don't know what they're doing, or they've got the wrong music, or their instruments are broken, or they don't know how to play the instrument they've been given. And so what you end up with is the collective noise that's being generated by all these people who call themselves musicians is utterly incoherent. And we're expecting that orchestra or that band to be playing Chopin or Rachmaninoff or jazz or blues or whatever. But frankly, if they could play Frère Jacques and the Wheels on the Bus Go Round, at least that's coherent noise you can build on. So all too often, what's needed in all of this is a conductor, is to make sense of actually, right, you guys can stay in the corner, you practice what you're doing, you're really good. You guys, here are some new instruments. We're going to invest a bit of time and energy in getting you to learn how to read music or play the instrument. And it's achieving rhythm and the synchronization of activity. And it's getting all of these multiple actors with different agendas, different focuses, different budgets to just look in the same direction and get agreement on what it is we're trying to achieve. There's a lot of heavy lifting doing that, but it does work.
Yeah. I always feel like metaphors make things sound so simple and it's obvious. And I wish, so in your metaphor, imagine walking into a room and you could see people walking around with violins on their head, and so that you knew what tune they had to play. I think it's so much more difficult than that, isn't it? Because you've got to, I think when we spoke last, we spoke about, you ask a couple of questions to see if someone's left brain or right brain orientated, because then you know how to approach them differently.
Right. That's right. I mean, it's a very simple, basic thing, but again, it helps you frame the language you use to communicate with people, and understanding whether they are left brain or right brain oriented to just speak language that they understand. Otherwise, it's you're just wasting your time, and then you get frustrated because you're saying, "Well, why don't you understand what I'm telling you?"
Yeah. And I suppose that goes into one of, like you talk about the gaps, you're trying to find the gaps. It's also the gaps within the people. So even though it's very simple and it may not be perfect, it allows you to connect quicker, to create efficiency quicker than if you didn't ask those questions and you treated everyone as if they were you. So if you're left brain or your right brain, I think understanding those differences allows you to conduct in a slightly different way to bring them all together. I feel like that's a skill learned through experience.
Yeah, I think so. And again, it comes back to that. There's often this debate about whether if you're engaged in recruitment, are you recruiting people who are high achievers but who are untrustworthy, or do you recruit someone who's utterly trustworthy but is a low achiever? And the instinct is I think all too often from a corporate point of view is achievement, a high achiever, because that's going to be the kind of that's going to be the best person. But then the impact that then has, if that person is untrustworthy, on the team dynamic is huge. Obviously, if you can get a high achiever, high trustworthy, that's the unicorn. Yeah. But sometimes actually having someone who is more trustworthy, who's a reasonable achiever towards a high achiever, is far better for the team dynamic. Again, depends on the context, depends on the team you're talking about, depends what you're trying to achieve.
But you can also, I imagine it'd be easier to turn a high trustworthy person into a high performer than a high performer into a high trustworthy person.
Agreed. But again, it's the nuance around it. It's a very simplistic way of putting it, but it's just that I'm a former military person, so I come at it very much from a military viewpoint. And this is something that's interesting also being a diplomat, because diplomats are very much focused on process, and military people are results orientated, and they talk different languages, and all too often you kind of you have a mismatch between diplomats and military folks sitting around a table trying to come up with a solution. It's a bit like if you imagine the difference between football, American football, and soccer. So let's use the American example to keep that analogy going. So the U.S. State Department are playing soccer, and the Department of Defense is playing American football. In American football, it's win or lose. There's no such thing as a draw. Whereas in soccer, you can have a draw and that's still a result. And it's just that thing of often getting the two sides to see that what is the result here that we're looking for. What is, and it may be totally different, but it's how do we find a common ground?
Because I suppose there are some circumstances when a draw is a definite win, because if you create a win for one, it's a loss for another.
Correct. But as long as if the draw is simply about keeping the process going, but all the while you're making compromises. There's that phrase that lawyers use is what is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, and that's your baseline, and always keeping in mind what that is or might be.
Yeah. Okay. And I suppose focusing in a bit more in on you, how did you get to the position that you're in?
It's a very weird path. I started out in the military back in the early, mid 1980s, and went off to university as an officer. I had a scholarship to go to university, which was great. But that was a different time in the military context. There were different things going on, and we found ourselves. I was when I left university, I went to Germany. And then was stationed there as part of the British Army of the Rhine, very much sort of in the kind of the twilight of the Cold War. I took part in Operation Desert Storm. I did tours in Northern Ireland, and then left at the age of about 28 I went off to law school. I was given the opportunity to go there. I got a contract that allowed me to go to law school and then get a job afterwards, which was great. And I practiced as a corporate lawyer for about 8 years, I think. And it was that rather strange thing of, I'm very grateful I did it. I'm enormously grateful I had the academic and intellectual discipline that the law offered me. I wouldn't necessarily have done it again if I had my time again as a second career. Because the part of the problem was that, this sounds like an excuse, but a lot of clients were looking at me, given my age, and they were looking at my age peers who were becoming partners, whereas I was just starting the journey. So I think clients were expecting a little bit more from me than I could necessarily offer them beyond making a cup of coffee and working the photocopying machine. So it was I then from there I went as the in-house counsel for in the early 2000s to work for a private security company based in the UK. And did that for a couple of years. And then on the basis of that, I was then invited to participate in a recruitment campaign to join the European Union. And I was successful in that. So I was able to join and was brought in essentially to set up the EU's overseas security service. And then transitioned into pure, mainstream diplomacy from there. And I went to Iraq as the deputy ambassador in 2013. I was in Iraq for 4 years during the kind of the emergence of ISIS, the rise of ISIS, and then its kind of zenith, and then its defeat. And then from there, went to Tanzania and ended up as our head of delegation in Tanzania until Brexit, and then I was recalled back to Brussels from there.
Okay. I mean, what was that time in Iraq like? There must have been some interesting experiences there, because you go over as an ambassador.
Yeah, I was the deputy ambassador in Baghdad, but when the ambassador was out, I had to act as the chargé, as the kind of the number one. And it was a fascinating time because, of course, and this goes back to my earlier point. This is a moment where diplomats were on the ground. The threat was converging on Baghdad, and there was probably one day I'd say in 2014, 2015, where we were seriously looking at each other going, are we going to be able to get out? Because it was converging very quickly. And there were lots of plans that were being made for closing down embassies, and people back in capitals were saying, we need to pull you out. We need to pull you out. And my view was that we had to be there on the ground. We needed to understand what was going on, because the moment we left, we were just like any other, news agency looking in from the outside. So our role was very much about steadying the ship, being on the ground, and then making sense of as the military campaign started to build up and was pushing ISIS back, and more territory was being liberated. This was in 2015. what role did we have to play in the kind of the stabilization of bringing people, allowing people who've been displaced by the fighting to allow them to come back home, and also with dignity to start rebuilding their lives. And this was very much the job that I was given to a specific task as part of the global coalition to counter ISIS, was to look at the particular threat that was preventing stabilization happening. And the threat that in that case was the IED. ISIS were using IEDs to target civilians. And we're not talking about small numbers here. There were hundreds and thousands of these things that were being very cynically used to target the civilian population, which meant that if you came home and you turned on your air conditioning, it would explode. Or you picked up your Quran on the coffee table, it would explode. Or you opened the refrigerator, it would explode. IEDs being placed under the floorboards of children's schools, the classrooms, so that when the kids run in the morning, the thing explodes. So this was a cynical play on the part of ISIS to undermine the government's efforts to prevent people from coming home. And bear in mind, this is 2015, so this was the height of the migrant crisis, when there were a lot of people coming from Syria, from other places that were heading for Europe. So the political imperative was very much about ensuring that I think it was about 2.5 to 3 million people who'd been displaced by the fighting were able to come home and start rebuilding their lives with dignity. But as I say, the IED was preventing us doing that. So I was put in charge of the committee that had to come up with a solution. Now, as a diplomat, I could have talked about it, but as a military guy, the conflict within me was, we've got to do something here, and we've got to make it work, and fast. And there isn't a playbook for this, so we had to kind of make it up on the spot. And as I say, using a methodology that I developed when I was there, which was kind of based on sound military principles of it's the full spectrum approach of what is it I need to do, what is the task, what resources have I got available, and where are the gaps, and how do I start leveraging off what other people are already doing, or bringing them in to get a comprehensive solution.
Yeah, and I mean, one big question that comes to me is like, it's obviously an interesting journey, but those are all quite big challenges that you take on, going from military into law, and you're going into law late, because you're obviously saying the age gap then. It's quite a big career transition. Obviously there was some form of interest back into security over to Afghanistan. What do you think for you was a big driver that allowed you to take those challenges on? Do you think it was internal? Do you think it was purpose? What would you bring it down to?
Well, I would say that none of it was ever planned, and it was very opportunistic. It was literally my life has been a series of not being afraid to turn left instead of right, because I've looked at it, I've talked about it with my wife, talked about it with my family, that this is something that is important. I think we can make a difference here, and I love a challenge whereby if something's broken, how am I going to fix it? And all of these opportunities have given me that opportunity, have given me that space. But what I would say is it's the accumulation of all of those skill sets that I think have helped me along the way. So the legal mind has helped me to look at the legal implications of doing something. The military mind has given me a sort of operational focus. The diplomatic part has given me an opportunity to see. It's not about what you say. It's not about what you say. It's how you say it. Being in the commercial world has taught me about the bottom line and what it means, and service and performance and product. So that if you package it all together, it means that where I am in today is very much about looking at a problem, to be curious about a problem, but to look at it from every single angle, to understand particularly what other people's perspectives may be, and what their interests and where the value added is.
I like that perspective. And were there any times in that where you really struggled, where you're like, should I actually be doing this? Is this, or am I just wasting my time?
I think every day is a bit of a struggle, because particularly when you're finding yourself up against resistance to what it is you're trying to do, and this is something I think is very important for maybe for your listeners who are people who are decision makers, about when you allow people to make decisions, or when people are making decisions, it's very important that they have the right mandate, and it's very important that they are given a clear mandate that allows them to go and speak to other people and say, look, I have been tasked with doing this. Because all too often you can find yourself with a good idea, but if you're not the guy in the room who's authorized to sell the idea, quite often you get this sort of cognitive dissonance or dissemblance that kicks in amongst others in the room, who just go, yeah, great, thanks. That doesn't suit me. It doesn't fit my agenda. It doesn't fit my budget. No. So it's about learning the skill of saying, okay, I am the orchestra conductor here, and I have been tasked with doing this, and this is what we're going to do. And there can be only one Spartacus.
Yeah, I like that. I am the orchestra conductor here. I know what and it's a really good analogy we keep coming back to, is because an orchestra conductor has to know the tune. He has to know how all of it fits in, but he's not doing any of it. He is just standing there and making sure that everyone knows when the highs come, when the lows come, how to smile, how to remind them to do things. And I suppose a different focus point to come into is you're a very proud rugby dad.
I am.
So obviously doing a good job. You're doing a good job there, because obviously Will, your son's, he's just breaking into, well, not just breaking into, but he is trying to cement his place in the England side. And how's that journey been for you? Because I want to bring in the importance of role model, and obviously as a father, the things that you're doing right, and some insights there.
Well, I think Will is, a lot of it is, it's down to himself. Actually, he's been an extraordinary, inwardly, he's very, very driven and very, very motivated to do what it is he wants to do. And his family around him have been hugely supportive of that. And he was one of those small kids at the age of 7. I remember 2003, the morning after the famous drop goal that. England won the World Cup, and Will, like so many other kids of his generation, were out on the park the next morning, all pretending to be Johnny with their hands clasped like this, and he's never looked back. And I think all credit to him. He's been very single-minded about what he wanted to do. He's had a lot of knocks along the way, a lot of injuries, and he's been very lucky. He's had some phenomenal coaches who've been there alongside him. At every level, so the kind of the opportunities that have been presented for him to progress and for him to survive and thrive have been important. And he's coming up. What is it now? We're playing Italy on Sunday, and then we've got the Wales match the following week, and that's his 50th cap for England. So wow. That's pretty impressive, and fingers crossed he may get himself a place on the Lions squad this year. We'll see that. We'll know in middle of April, I guess. But no, he's doing well, and I have to say, but as a parent watching it, it's agonizing because it's again. I love rugby. I played rugby up to a certain level. My father played internationally as well, so he I didn't reach that height, but I love the game. I love the sport. I'm very passionate about the sport. But it's now being the father of someone or a parent of someone who's playing at that level. It's no more. It's not just about the 80 minutes. It's the build up to the game. Is he going to get picked? Is he going to play? Is he going to come off the bench? Is he going to play well? Is he going to get injured? And then after the game, you've got to remember that there's quite a number of people around the world who have an opinion on how he's played. So you have to kind of endure the slings and arrows of all of that. So it's but we're enormously proud of him. He's done very well.
Yeah. Of course. And do you ever get tempted to jump to defense on the keyboard warriors? Or
Absolutely not.
Just,
absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I think that would be unhelpful to him. It's not. It takes you down a rabbit hole that you don't want to go down.
Yeah, you remind me of like my mom used to just tell me she used to see all of the different fan comments, and she was good at filtering the good ones. She's like, "Oh, did you see what so and so said?" And then she used to send me them just screenshotting. But I don't know if she ever made up a pseudonym and just replied on my behalf for any of things. But it was interesting to see from her parents. She's very proud from the parents' journey that way. But bringing back in the role models and why I want to bring it up is obviously from a social point of view and parenting and men's point of view, there's obviously a bit of struggle going on at the moment. Suicide rates have gone up and all that in men particularly. And I'm hoping that there's a lot of fathers listening to this. Is there anything that you could say that might just remind someone that is struggling as a dad and he's being hard on himself and he's got these high expectations of kids, as parents sometimes do? What bit of advice could you give them that's just hopefully that either helped you or you realized and want to help someone else?
Well, I think my father was someone who he was. Dad was a real adventurer. He was always outdoors, and he was always climbing and skiing and just had his hand in every sport possible, and he was very good at it. And he for him it was always about. I remember when we used to go, we'd go climbing or hiking and stuff. And Dad's view was, the metaphor he used is like, life is about climbing a mountain. And I can go halfway up the mountain and I can turn back and say I've had a nice walk or whatever. But actually, it is about setting yourself that goal of saying, I want to get to the top. I want to see not only to have the personal achievement of getting to the top, but it is that wow factor of suddenly seeing what lies beyond. And some of my happiest memories, I think, as a child, I do remember sitting with Dad. I mean, he didn't smoke, but it was the only time I ever saw him smoke. Was he'd sit at the top of a mountain and just watch the sunrise, and he'd have a fag in his mouth, and he'd just look utterly contented. And I just thought, that's quite. There's some aura here that if you could package it, it's there's something about just appreciating what's going on around you. And I as I say, I'm very much a glasses half full person. So I kind of instinctively am always pushing for the top of the mountain to try and see what lies beyond, because it is that magical thing of seeing a great view or a great, I don't know, seeing a sunrise or a sunset or whatever. Just that be curious about the environment. That's the thing, and teach your children to be curious. Teach your friends to be curious. Teach your family to be curious. We live in Belgium, and one of my great regrets from when I was serving in the army out in Germany was that I didn't explore my surroundings. I would sit in our officers' mess like all my colleagues and grumble about the fact that we weren't back in London or whatever. So I'm frantically trying to make up for time now that we're living in Europe, because everything's on our doorstep. And despite Brexit, which is a tragedy, the beauty of being here, where so much, I'm an historian, amateur historian, there's so much history on your doorstep that you can just go scrabbling around looking for things and looking away from the beaten path for things that haven't been touched for sometimes hundreds of years. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think it's great, and I think the mountain, or the get to the top of the mountain as a goal analogy, it's the one big thing is it keeps you looking up.
Correct.
So that, like, when you stop looking up, you start to look down, and you can sometimes review a bad part of the journey and get focused on that. Whereas the mountain is, keeps you looking.
But there's a caveat on the mountain one, because of course, and this is something that often mountain climbers will tell you, is that when you stand back from the mountain and you look at it in its entirety, it looks very straightforward. It looks, okay, well, we can do that. But it's that moment when you're suddenly up against the rock face and you're thinking, okay, where's my first point of contact? And that's all too often is the challenge. And it's that, I suppose the lesson from that is preparing your route before you get there. But if you keep that metaphor going, with all of our kids, we've sat down with each of them and have when they've talked about what they want to do with their lives and where they want to go and what they want to make out of it. I'm for me, the most important thing is that if they're happy, and it's important that they are appreciative of the people around them, and that they are curious about their world. But whatever they want to do, understand what it needs to take to get to that point. If you deviate from that line, that's fine. It doesn't matter. But just understand that the moment you deviate, it's going to take you longer to get back to where you want to go to if you're still following that path. And again, that doesn't matter. It just understand what the implications and consequences of your actions and decisions are.
I think the important point that I'll take away from that is people can get through anything as long as they feel like they've made the choice. And that's why choices become so important. And you always got to try and find the way that you've made the choice. That's why you're doing what you're doing. And then I suppose shifting it back slightly to you, Charlie, what's been, I'd say, the greatest lesson in your journey?
The greatest lesson I would probably say is not to waste opportunities. And so when you are presented with something, reflect on it and decide whether it's good for you, whether by doing whatever that opportunity is or taking advantage of it, it makes you a better person. If there's something you can learn from it, if there's something you can benefit, or if you can benefit other people from it, or by doing it, you actually learn more. It's curiosity. Be curious. Be curious. Be curious.
Yeah.
And there's that lovely phrase where curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back to life.
I haven't heard the second bit to it. I love that. And then, what scares you the most?
Getting old.
No. Okay.
No. I think it's what scares me the most. I think I worry a lot about the state of the world today. I worry about where it's going. I worry what it means for our kids, our grandchildren. I worry about whether we have the resources and the will to be able to react and respond to what's going on and what needs to be done. But again, as I say, there are lots of exciting young people who are coming up, who are the future, who need to see the world through a positive lens, and not to be too downhearted by what's going on.
Yeah. And where would you start on that? So you said obviously what scares you about the way that things are going and everything. Where would you start? Where would you ask if I suddenly had 16 million listeners to this, something went viral and they came into this exact point, and you could give them one message, what would that be that everyone could try and do a collective impact that had this compounding effect?
Well, first and foremost, agree what it is you're trying to achieve, what matters, really what matters. And this is what I was saying earlier on. I think if you can start by agreeing on the strategic outcome, the conversation then around what it is that needs to be done and how we're going to get there. The risk is, as I was saying, is that you just become fixated on the tactical or the operational, and that just takes you in all sorts of bad directions. Not least because, and particularly with events as they are at the moment, you're starting to see within society this sort of resonance where people are actually just resonating without really knowing what to do or where to turn or who to listen to, who to believe. And there's that lovely phrase I heard the other day where free speech does not mean free reach. And yes, everybody should be entitled to say what they think, but just using social media as a platform to vent your spleen about stuff that's free reach. That's not free speech. Or that's how I would say it. And so again, how do you just get people to kind of focus on the good, on making life a little bit better? How do you care about other people rather than just necessarily about ourselves? How do you think about that one good deed you've done for the day for someone else rather than just for yourself?
Yeah, and I suppose framing, like just the takeaway I've got from that is it's framing it correctly, where you don't want to be blindly optimistic that stay positive and everything will be fine. It's recognizing that there are challenges, but actually those challenges remain whether you are pessimistic or optimistic about them. So keeping that positive frame of mind and going, okay, I can't change that all at once, but I can make sure that I'm trying to stay curious every day and I'm being less biased into my own my own personal viewpoints and thinking that nothing else matters, and actually trying to learn that missing information or that gap between my understanding and someone else's. Because whether you're in a marriage or a team or as high up as you are, it's still communication seems to be the art that can either bind or divide people.
Absolutely, and often miscommunication is what leads to so much conflict and misunderstanding and apprehension or anxiety or whatever it may be. You simply framing language in a way that my wife and I, we have a thing where we sort of look at each other and say, okay, I may say something to you that you don't like, but please understand it came from a good place. So if you don't like it, I will respect the fact that you can say to me, that wasn't very nice or that wasn't very kind or whatever, but it wasn't meant with any malice as a point of departure. So it comes back to, it's not what I say, it's how I say it. And if we can, our starting point then is, okay, time out. We need to kind of have a conversation around what you just said and what did you mean by what you just said, and having that conversation just allows us to decompress in a way that doesn't waste time, energy, resource, or effort, and take us in a bad direction.
Yeah, I like that. I was going to say, I was smiling as you were talking about your wife and you and the way you communicate, because we've, between Ray and myself, my wife, I've come up with a key word. It's called assumption. So whenever there's conflict, what helps us trigger that we are having conflict unnecessarily is, you've made an assumption that I had an ill intention with what I said, which is what you were saying there, is like, it was a good intention. It may not have landed that well. So let's talk about that. So I think we are unfortunately got a way in communicating in society or in general where a lot of people make assumptions and argue according to the assumptions they've made without being curious as to what was actually meant. And if we can just do that, then we might find solutions a lot quicker than before. Have you ever read Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg?
Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah, his outlook on society and everything is brilliant, isn't it?
Well, I have a sort of I think we talked about it when we spoke before, but I had this sort of little trick I do with people. It's not a trick; it's a little thing to try and demonstrate the point, which is I'll place a bottle on the table in front of them, and I'll say to someone who's sitting on the other side of the table, describe what you can see, and of course they will tell me what they can see of that bottle, and I'll say to them, no, I'm sorry, I disagree. I think you're wrong. And they'll say, no, this is what I can. I'm telling you what I can see. And of course, it's that simple thing of just turning the bottle round and saying, okay, now I see it from your perspective. But by the way, I'd like to come to your side of the table and see it through your eyes, or come to my side of the table and see it through my eyes. And all too often, it's that thing of I had a lovely moment last year, I should say, where I was invited to go and have a meeting with an African leader, and we sat for about 3 hours, just the two of us, just talking about stuff, and it was a conversation where we were just throwing stuff back and forth. There were no advisors yakking away in our ears, telling us what to say or how to say it. It was a respectful conversation of I'd like to just talk and have the opportunity to talk. And I think that's a problem also, is that all too often we don't find the time to talk and communicate and listen and empathize and all of those things that matter so much in verbal dialogue.
Yeah, I think curiosity and communication are going to solve a lot of issues if we can somehow manage to find the answer to that. Maybe get nonviolent communication shared in all the schools around the world and being part of the syllabus. I think that would be a great start point. But Charlie, thank you very much for coming on. We're going to obviously bring it to the close here, but I think it's been fantastic to have someone of your stature come onto the podcast and allow insight into your journey, into your points of view and what matters the most, and even some of the issues that or challenges you face, and really hoping the listeners can take some of that away and realize that it's we're all humans, and actually some of the core fundamentals are going to help you no matter what level you go to, no matter where you go in life. And I really appreciate you coming on and be able to give some of your gravitas and some of your thoughts towards any of the subjects that we spoke about.
Not at all, Don. As I say, it's a privilege and a pleasure. As I said, you talked about what was my fear. Age was, I flippantly said, but it's also the benefit of age is and now with grey hair is maybe I might be considered a bit wise. So yes. It is about sharing that wisdom and sharing the lessons that I have identified through life, and what lessons I've drawn from, what takeaways I've taken from that, and how hopefully I've been able to use it to my advantage, and hopefully for the benefit of others too. But thank you for listening and for the questions. Very, very enjoyable.
No problem. I think it's really good to have, just a compliment, by the way, your openness to come on here and speak freely. It's not as common as you think. So I'm desperate to try and break generational biases where you've got millennials and Gen X and Gen Z. And I think it just does show your stature. That you come on here. It's creating connection, which we otherwise wouldn't have. So thank you very much. Oh, and by the way, how can people follow your journey if they want to? Because obviously they've got some insight from this.
Well, for those that are, I have a LinkedIn account. Don't ask me what it is, but you can just Charlie Stuart.
I'll put the link in the show notes.
And for those that are interested in history, I've got a little website, a blog that's running called www.greatstories-withdates.com. Again, I can send that to you, but it's just an unusual sort of Instagram and Facebook.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much, Charlie. I really appreciate it.
Much obliged. Thanks so much.
Right, cheers.
Bye.
Bye.